Hi everybody, this is a video I'm going to post here under the paper draft and peer review module that will help you go over how to write the paper draft in reference to the larger paper and also how to do the peer review. And so let's just quickly look at the peer review guidelines that I've posted here. So you can open it up, you can see that you can download it, you can look at it. I have it open already, so I'm going to look at it right here. And so this document is useful for both writing your draft and also your full paper, and also doing the peer review. And so as a peer reviewer, make comments about each of these parts. Just write out a document probably like this that you have bullet points where you give feedback to the person whose paper you're reading. And then as you're writing your paper draft and also your full paper at the end, you can also use these guidelines for yourself to see if you're on the right track, if there's anything that you have to address, essentially the criteria of the paper. And so there's three different components I've put these into. So one is general writing. So the first one is about paper organization. So is it easy to follow and understand? Does it flow well? So as you're reading the paper, it's kind of easy to read. It flows, the ideas come into a nice sequence. It doesn't seem like it's jostling around here and there. It's jumping around. It kind of has a nice direction to it. It's well structured. There's transitions between paragraphs. You don't have to make a big deal out of that, but there should be some sort of connection between the paragraphs. The reader should sort of understand where the paper is going. So we talked about this in class. Remember, less is more in writing. And so does the author choose a specific set of issues and topics to explore? So are they focused? And do they make a good choice in terms of how many things that they're talking about? Because if they try to talk about too many things, they won't be able to develop their arguments. So, but you don't also want just a couple things, because then it won't be a very comprehensive paper. So you want a good number of things that you can fully discuss, but then of course you don't want too much because you won't be able to elaborate on those things. Then we have writes from own perspective. Emphasizes own arguments. So this is what I was saying, that it shouldn't be a book report. So it's not a book report. It's not you just saying what you read in the articles, but it should be something that's your unique perspective on these things that you've read. So you now are a mini expert on the issue that you've read a number of articles about already. And so given that, you should be able to make some sort of argument that's your own based on what you've read. So yes, you are using what you read to come up with your ideas, but they should really be your ideas and something that's unique. So when the person reads your paper, they should be able to say, wow, I know what they think. And it's clearly like, wow, this is something that's unique to that person. So look out for that and try to do that. And basically avoid being generic. And so I talk about that a little bit later. But if you're generic and somebody reads it, then it's like, oh, anybody could have wrote this. I have no idea anything about what this person thinks. Anybody could have wrote this thing. It's just so bland and general. So avoid that. When you're writing, one way to avoid having it sound like a book report is to make sure to put the authors of articles that you're using as references in citations in parentheses. So those authors' names should be in parentheses and not in sentences. So you don't want to say Carlson 2022 said this and that. You don't want that. You don't want the person's name in there because it sounds like a book report. It sounds like you're just talking about them and their ideas. Also, avoid doing things like this study found that, this study found this, that study found this, another study found this. That's really kind of bad writing. So don't make your paragraph structure around studies. It should be around ideas. So, for example, adolescent substance abuse has been linked to early problems in emotion regulation, parentheses, authors of study one, blah, authors of study two, so you can actually integrate different articles into ideas. So really your paper should be structured around ideas that you have and not study this, study that, or this researcher said this. That will help it be your own paper from your perspective. And so I already talked about it being unique, so it really needs to show you. It's you, and nobody else would write something like what you've written. So if it's generic, it's general, it's bland, you don't really know what the person thinks, give feedback about that and try to avoid that as you're writing. So paper is easy to understand, the logic is easy to follow, writes in simple, straightforward, clear language, avoids jargon and complicated terms. And so sometimes when people are starting to write, learning how to write in college, they think they have to sound really fancy and scientific and technical. And when that happens, it can be really bad. It can sound like a bunch of junk. It just, like, what does that stuff mean, even? Um, Good scientific writing is simple and straightforward. So keep it simple and easy. And if there's any relevant terms that you want to use, because there's a theory you're using, or there's some constructs or concepts you're using, make sure you define them in simple ways. Avoid being redundant, and so make sure that your paper doesn't repeat the same points over and over again. That's really bad writing, and also it takes up a lot of space to do that. So, ideally, each sentence, each paragraph should add something new to the paper. So when you look at it, when you do your fine editing of your paper, you should ask yourself that, like, oh, I said this already, maybe I shouldn't say this again. And then in terms of general writing, the last thing that's listed here is using an active tense and voice. Uses first person to avoid sounding passive. So I know a lot of you were taught not to use first person. I don't know, don't ask me why, but I won't get into that. But for APA style, it explicitly says it's okay to use first person, especially if it helps you avoid sounding passive. And so I know probably you have experiences where you were told not to use first person and you end up writing these really strange sounding sentences. And they're really kind of vague and they kind of seem like they go around in different directions and are not really exactly what you want to say. That's passive. So make sure it's active. Also, an active voice helps the paper show that these are your ideas. When people use passive voice, it's really hard to tell, are you saying what you think or are you just repeating and citing something from an article that you read? So make sure that the tense is active. For a lot of these things in the general writing, one of the pieces of feedback that I give people as you're drafting your paper is to have somebody read it out loud to you. Because often when you're writing a paper, you think it's okay. Like you've said something and you think it flows well, you think it's okay, but you've been staring at the paper. And a lot of times when people are writing and kind of staring at the paper, they're filling in blanks and they're putting things there in their head that's not actually in the writing. So having somebody read your paper out loud to you can often pick up a lot of these aspects of general writing that should be corrected in there. So that's general writing. That's probably the most extensive amount of things that are listed. So then there's paper content. And so this is pretty straightforward because I want to give you the freedom to explore your paper in the directions that you want to take it. And so the first part of the paper, a maximum of 3 pages out of the 10, explores the issue involved. So the issue, I mean your topic. And so you should be elaborating on developmental factors and processes. So developmental, that's our class. And so factors and processes are just how somebody relates development in that topic you're looking at. So if you're looking at, let's say, substance abuse, and so what are, in adolescence, what are the factors that relate to substance abuse in adolescence? What processes are there? So if I say that one factor is emotional regulation in adolescence. Well, what does emotional regulation have to do with the development of substance abuse? What's the connection there? So processes are about connecting to things. So you can say, well, there's a factor here that relates to it, like parenting, let's say. Well, what is it about parenting? Why would parenting lead to this outcome? So try to be specific in those processes. And so when the reader reads that first part of the paper, they should understand some of the key factors in the development of that thing that you're looking at. So remember, though, that less is more, so you probably can't look at everything. But for the number of factors that you look at, they understand, well, this is what's happening. The second part of the paper, which is at least 7 pages, is, well, we know the problem or we know the issue. It's not necessarily a problem. It could be things like homeschooling, which aren't problems, but we still want to optimally develop kids in homeschooling. So we now understand it in the first part of the paper. So understanding that thing. In the second part of the paper, what do you propose? What do you propose to help people optimally develop? Or if you're looking at a problem like substance abuse, what things would you do to prevent, intervene, or treat that problem? So prevention is, you prevent it from happening. So you say, well, developmentally, we know that there's these risk factors. So maybe if we address those risk factors, people won't actually develop that problem in the first place. Intervention tends to be sort of early on. So somebody is developing that problem, but you do an early intervention to try to make sure it doesn't go too far. And then treatment is they've gone far. They're in trouble. They already have some deep problems from this thing. So how do we treat that? So you are given the freedom to think about what level you want to do, whether it's prevention, intervention, or treatment, or you could look at all three. But do keep in mind less is more. So don't try to do too much and not explain things. So try to highlight key things you would do in terms of this prevention, intervention, treatment. And when you're doing this part of the paper, the last part of the paper, you should also be specific on those developmental aspects. So, as you're saying, well, I would do this to prevent it. Well, you should have some sort of argument about, well, why would doing that help prevent it? What would be the developmental process? Why would it work? You don't have to be so complicated and elaborate on that, but I want you to be at least specific about why would that thing work. So for every thing you do, for every factor that you address, why would it work? And tie that to what you read in your articles and also what you've learned in class. And then the last part is a more technical part, but something that we need to do, which has to do with APA style. So you should follow the APA style for student paper. There's a link there. I don't know if your computer is different. When I try to open the hyperlink, it doesn't work, but if I copy the hyperlink from this document, it works. But never mind if that's not a big deal for you, or you're not sure how to do that. Right here in the paper draft peer review, there is a link here to the student paper APA style. So if you click that, it might look like this, but just click this thing right here and it'll take you to the web page. So this is a student paper in APA style. So there's a title page. Title page does not count as a page in terms of the 10 pages. And then it just sort of shows you how to do things. So there's how to do your headings, how to do citations, and we'll talk about citations also, but you can kind of see there's examples here. And notice there's no abstract, there's nothing like that. So you've read what's called empirical articles. So empirical articles are about a study conducted, and those have sections such as the abstract, introduction, method, results, discussion. You don't have those sections. You didn't do a study. It's a paper, so it's a student paper, so you aren't going to have things like an abstract. So just write the paper as sort of a regular paper, and again, there's some guidance here in terms of things to do for APA style citations and things like that. And then at the end, you have the references. By the way, the references start on their own separate page. And let's see if this is a good way. Yep, so you can actually see it here. So it shows that the last page of this paper is right here. They don't show the whole page. There's more space that would be here. The references don't come right here. They don't come in that last page. You put them on its own page. So the references start on their own page. There's examples here. If you like seeing different examples, you can look at these, but I do have a web page that gives you more specific guidance on that. So make sure you follow that sample paper for students, student papers in APA style. So the paper narrative is limited to 10 pages. That's double spaced, standard font. So make sure you use standard font also. But double spaced. I noticed a number of people did single spaces early this semester. I was a bit confused by that. Maybe that's from high school or something. It's double spaced. And you don't count, again, the title page and the references. And I will say that it'll be really difficult to write a good paper in less than 10 pages. If you write less than 10 pages, I don't think you're probably doing it as well as you could have done in terms of either comprehensiveness, so looking at a number of factors, or in terms of depth, in terms of explaining why this issue develops this way and why your ideas for optimal development or treatment, prevention or intervention about a problem maybe are not as well discussed as they could have been. So it probably will take you 10 pages pretty much to do this paper well. And then the last thing here is just to make sure you follow APA style for in-text citations and references. So there's a link there. You can copy it. Otherwise, you can also click here in Canvas, APA citations and reference style. This is something that was given to you previously for the bibliography. Again, if it doesn't show, you can always click here. It will take you to the page. It takes you directly to what you need, is this example right here. So I know that there's dozens and dozens of examples of things here, but you've been reading journal articles, so you only need this one. So the first thing you see is the reference style. So this is for the references, which is the reference list at the end of the paper. And so you have the authors by last name and then initials. You have the year of the publication. You have the title of the article, capitalize the first word after a colon, and any sort of proper nouns like, in this case, United States. Then you have the name of the journal. That is italicized, and you capitalize everything except for of, and, things like that. Then in italics, you have the volume number. In regular font, so not italics, in parentheses, you have the issue number. And then you have the pages, give the full pages. And then you give a DOI. Do the best you can to get a DOI. If you don't have a DOI that you can see, You can usually find it in the initial search that you found. Usually the DOI is listed there. The DOI is oftentimes given also in the first page, somewhere around the borders usually, of the article. And if you can't find it there, you can oftentimes just put the title of the article in Google and search it, and then typically you'll find uh, the publisher's webpage for that article, and usually that will have the DOI there also. So that's the references. Also notice that you indent it. So the first line is flush to the left margin, but then you have an indentation for the lines after that. So make sure you have that. And beware of cutting and pasting. So oftentimes people cut and paste from either the search that they had or perhaps something from an online source. Beware of that because those things are often incorrect and have the wrong APA style. So if you're cutting and pasting, you better double check that it's in the same style as this. And then what's nice about this, it not only gives you the reference, but how you should cite it. So here's the authors and the year. That's pretty much what you need for the citation. What's nice about APA style is that if you have 3 or more authors, you don't have to write them all out. So remember, I want you to put the authors in parentheses, so that's one way to make sure that you're making the paper your own and not making it a book report about the articles. So if there's 3 or more authors, all you do is list the first author's last name, et al., and then the year of publication. So that's a nice little reference. You can also sort of look around here. It will give you other ways of doing it. And so I'm looking for them here. So here's an example. If you have just one person who's an author, you just put their name. So you would, if you're just citing Butler in this case, you'd have parentheses, Butler, comma, 2017, and then you put the end of parentheses. This is what you do if you have multiple articles that you're citing. You do it that way. And then finally, if you have 2 authors, and I know there's one down here somewhere. Here it is. So if you have 2 authors, it looks like this. So 2 authors, you give both of their last names. You put the ampersand, that little and sign, comma, and then the year of publication. So just follow those models for your APA citations. So again, references are the reference list at the end of the paper. Citations are the things in your text, in your writing, to give credit to people for things that you are basing your ideas on. So that's it. And so follow those guidelines, and those guidelines will help you write your paper also. And the final thing I'll say is make the paper draft as good as you can, because the quality of the feedback you get will help you develop your paper better. So if your paper draft is not well developed, you won't get a lot of feedback beyond sort of people saying, well, you need to do this better. But that's not going to be super helpful. So do the best you can on this draft. Make it as complete, as close as you can to the final paper, and you'll get better feedback. That will also save you time later on in the semester. You don't have to do as much work later in the semester. If you kind of blow off this draft and therefore you won't get good feedback, so you won't get that perspective. So when you're writing on your own, then you don't have that perspective. You're just going to be all on your own. And then it's going to take you more time to write later in the semester. So take this opportunity to get the work done now and to get yourself in good shape for the end of the semester. So that's it for the paper draft and the peer review. Please ask me if you have any questions. Otherwise, have a good week.